The guy walked out in the middle of my sermon once. I said, "Where are you going?" He says, "I'm going to get a haircut." I said, "Why are you going now?" He says, "I didn't need one before." So there's this Jew on the Jerusalem light rail, and everybody's reading Hebrew newspapers or the Jerusalem Post, and this one Jew is reading a neo-Nazi newspaper from Germany. And his friend cuts on the rail and he says, "Moshe, ata mishuga? Are you mad? Are you crazy? What are you reading?" He said, "Listen here, Yaakov. I read the Jewish newspapers. What do I see? Anti-Semitism here and there and everywhere. The United Nations keeps condemning us. The European Union isn't much better. It's terrible. Only bad news. It's depressing. I read this here Nazi newspaper. You know what it says? The Jews own the banks. The Jews own the newspapers. The Jews run Hollywood. The Jews are running the whole world. I'm a chaya. It's a pleasure to read such a newspaper." In the 1930s, a Nazi said to a Jew, "You Jews are the cause of all the world's problems." And the Jew responded to the Nazi, he says, "You're right. And also the bicycle riders." The Nazi says, "The bicycle riders? Why the bicycle riders?" The Jew says, "Why the Jews?" So that's my subject tonight, why the Jews? I don't know if you saw the toilet graffiti. How odd of God to choose the Jews. And somebody answered, "No, not odd. The Jews chose God." Whoever coined the phrase chosen people certainly was not an expert at PR. I wouldn't say it's the way to win friends and influence people. We're still doing damage control. Of course, we at JLI, we understand that chosen people is a responsibility, not just privilege. It was just the parsha the other week, where the Hebrew words are actually am segula, which doesn't mean chosen, but treasured, a treasured nation, because we have a treasured responsibility to be ambassadors of God in the world. But we know, and it affects us very deeply, very personally, and very emotionally, the huge spike in anti-Semitism around the world in recent times. Can it be attributed directly to Corona? I doubt it. Lockdown, Gaza, almost anything becomes a reason for anti-Semitism. And we've seen it around the world, and even in communities like Brooklyn, which is unbelievable. Over the centuries, numerous reasons have been advanced for anti-Semitism. We killed their God. We poisoned their wells. The blood libels. We killed their children to use their blood for our Pesach wine or matzahs. Did you know there was a time in the Middle Ages when the rabbis in Europe forbade Jews from drinking red wine at their Pesach Seder, even though halachically red wine is preferable, because of blood libels being so rampant that they reckoned it was actually dangerous, and they said drink white wine instead. And of course, there's general xenophobia. People are afraid and dislike anyone different from themselves. And of course, the traditional resentment of Jewish success. Today, nothing to do with Jews. It's all about Israel. We love Jews. We just have a problem with Israel. What are they doing to the Palestinians? It's not anti-Semitism, it's anti-Zionism. And we are here, we all know that that's a total whitewash, and it's the very same old Jew hatred. And the new anti-Israel campaigners are the very same old anti-Jewish haters. And we get it from right and left. You know, Margaret Thatcher once said, famously, she said, you know, if you walk, they said, why is she so extreme? She was a right-winger. They said, what? She said, if you walk in the middle of the road, you get hit from both sides. Israel gets it from the right and the left, and from the middle of the road, moderates as well, all too often. But are there any real, genuine reasons for anti-Semitism? And the answer is not really. Everything we've mentioned are all excuses. If there is a reason, well, Dennis Prager and Joseph Telushkin authored a book together some years ago where I took the title of this talk from. It's called Why the Jews? And they argue that all of the above reasons are just excuses, and if there's any reason that we could possibly suggest, it might be that Jews get on other people's nerves. Why? Because it's true. The Jews did choose God. We chose to align ourselves with justice, righteousness, morality, and virtue in every single generation. Every movement for social change throughout the centuries has had Jews at its forefront. Communism was started by, there were so many Jews involved. And they were trying to make a better life for their own people. Socialism, Bundism, hippieism, global warming, save the whales, the refugee immigration problem. There are always Jews leading the charge, way in excess of our numbers and our percentages of the population. And there is a reason for this. We say in Olenu Letaken Olam b'malchut shin dalad yud, we call it Tikkun Olam, to repair the world. That is a Jewish imperative that we subscribe to. I live in South Africa. The great icon of South Africa was, of course, Nelson Mandela, who was sentenced to life in prison by the white apartheid regime back in 1963-64. Did you know that 5 out of Mandela's 12 co-defendants, 5 out of 12 were Jewish? We are 1/4% of the population, and 40% of Mandela's partners in crime for the struggle of the oppressed black majority were Jews. Let me ask you this. You're an intelligent crowd. I'm sure many of you know the answer, so you can volunteer it when I'm finished. Let me finish. Who said these words? Quote, "The 10 Commandments have lost their validity. And as for conscience, that was a Jewish invention. Conscience is a blemish on the human psyche, like that other Jewish invention, circumcision. Circumcision damages the body, and conscience damages the soul." The author of those words was Adolf Hitler. Yamach Shemoy, quite right. Wittingly or unwittingly, by birth, by design, or by the experience of history, Jews are the conscience of the world. And the world doesn't like it. And Hitler found kindred spirits throughout Europe and beyond. You can just read the book Hitler's Willing Executioners, how the European nations were only too happy to get involved in killing Jews. So historically, what has been the Jewish traditional response to anti-Semitism? I want to talk about 2 classical responses. One was assimilation. You don't like us? Okay, we won't be Jewish. Then you'll like us, right? Well, besides the fact that it doesn't work, but that was the reasoning of many people. So if in the 1930s or 1940s being Jewish in Europe carried with it a death sentence, Jews said, "I'm out of here." And those who could get out of Europe did. Many went to America. Many went to faraway places like Australia. And many of those immigrants wanted to spare their children and grandchildren the danger and suffering of this Jewish label, which could kill them. And so they never told their children that they were Jewish in the first place. They changed their names. They changed their noses. They started doing things like wearing plaid socks and playing sports like polo. They joined Gentile country clubs and tried to erase every vestige of Jewishness from their family. Why? To escape anti-Semitism. If you can't beat them, join them, they reckoned. So one such Jew was born Haimi Cohen. He's now not so Jewish. He's Horatio Cowan. and he applies to a very posh, pucker, waspish country club where Jews are not allowed. And he applies for admission, and he's having a personal interview with the chairman of this very, very special country club, Mr. John Christopher Buckingham III. And at the interview, Cowan is looking at this chairman's features, and it seems to him like he may actually have some Jewish features. And so he very, very gently and sensitively plucks up his courage and says, Mr. Buckingham III, excuse me, perhaps by any chance you possibly have any Jewish blood in your family? I beg your pardon, said Mr. Buckingham. I'm a proud Presbyterian. My father was a proud Presbyterian. My Zayda Olav Hasholem was a proud Presbyterian. Well, there's the other Jew who also applied to such a country club, and he was rejected out of hand. And when he asked them for an explanation, why did they said, it's your religion. But he said, what's wrong with my religion? He said, on the application you wrote Goy. So one of the classical responses to anti-Semitism was definitely assimilation. Deny your Jewishness and you're safe, problem solved. Of course, until Chabad finds you. But there was another very famous historic response to anti-Semitism on the other side of the spectrum. Not escaping one's Jewishness, but embracing our historical uniqueness and historical place in the world and in the family of nations. And it was called Zionism. And Theodor Herzl, the founder of modern Zionism, we all know, had a famous dream. If you will it, it is no dream. Im tirtzu ein ze agada. Herzl's dream of a Jewish state was not for religious reasons, not for historical reasons, not for philosophical or mystical reasons. He was a secular person in the extreme. It was simply a practical way to give Jews an opportunity to escape European anti-Semitism. Herzl was a journalist. He was horrified by the notorious, blatant anti-Semitism he saw in the courtrooms of Europe, the infamous Dreyfus case. And he said, okay, you don't like us here in Europe? No problem. We'll go somewhere else. We'll create our own country. And that's why he and many of his comrades were even considering seriously the offer of Uganda. What is Uganda? A Jewish country. But they weren't looking for Jewish countries. There was nothing historical or spiritual. They were looking for a practical escape from European anti-Semitism. He was a pure pragmatist. So Israel today is, Baruch Hashem, a great miracle. One of the most amazing success stories of any nation on earth. We don't only survive, we thrive. The tiny nation of a couple of million of Jews, starting off as immigrants with nothing, has become today a virtual superpower amongst nations, militarily, scientifically, medically, technologically. It's unbelievable. The COVID vaccine pioneers. First we were the startup nation, now we're the vaxa nation. But let me ask you, Mashiach is coming, right? This afternoon, before Shabbos. The revival of the dead is not far behind. So what happens, what do you think will happen when Theodor Herzl rises from the dead and he sees his dream? There is a Jewish state, and look how successful it is. Will Herzl have nachas? I'm sure he will. But would Herzl be able to say that his dream was realized? That the purpose of a Jewish state which would stop anti-Semitism was realized? Of course not. Anti-Semitism is alive and well, and in fact it's more focused on Israel than anywhere else. And anti-Zionism, as we know, is the new anti-Semitism. We love Jews, we have a problem with Israel. We know that lie all too well. So Israel has become the central enemy for anti-Semites from the right and the left. A generation ago it was Jews get out of Europe, go back to Palestine. Today it's Jews get out of Palestine, go back to Europe. Can't win. It's not a simple problem to solve anti-Semitism. It is the world's longest hatred. And in fact, many years ago, in the early years, the Rebbe was visited by a very respected Jewish novelist named Harvey Swados. It wasn't that many years after World War II and the Holocaust. And this novelist, a very intelligent man, asked the Rebbe, in private, in his room, "Rabbi, do you think it could happen again?" Referring to the Holocaust. When I read the Rebbe's answer, it was chilling. He said in Yiddish, "Morgen in de früh," tomorrow morning. Could it happen again? Chas v'shalom, God forbid, 6 million times. Tomorrow morning it could happen again if it was left to the nations of the world. The Rebbe said, Hashem will not allow it to happen again. But as far as the world is concerned, tomorrow morning. Frightening. I was shocked when I first read that years ago. Today, sadly, I'm no longer so shocked. What is going on in the world today, what has become acceptable even in the hallowed halls of the United States Congress, what public representatives are getting away with is unbelievable and frightening. Now, you may be surprised that as a rabbi, if I tell you that one of my great religious heroes is not a rabbi at all. In fact, he wasn't all that religious, but he was a great Jewish leader. He was the first prime minister of Israel. His name was David Ben-gurion. Now, until Bibi Netanyahu came along, Ben-gurion was the longest-serving Israeli prime minister. The story goes that he was once opening a big book expo in Jerusalem, I believe, and there was a little corner of a Chabad books display there, and these two Chabadniks manning the book display see Ben-gurion, and in typical Chabad chutzpah, they go up to Ben-gurion, Adon Rosh HaMemshalah, would you like to put on tefillin? And Ben-gurion says, Pamayim bayom? Twice in one day? I don't know what, that's what he said, okay. But Ben-gurion's famous line, which I consider very important to our topic today, and I consider it the correct response to anti-Semitism. Ben-gurion said, it does not matter what the Goyim say, it matters what the Jews do. Meaning, stop panicking. It's a fact of life. They don't like us. Get over it. Should we roll over and die? Should we assimilate? Give up? No. A Jew's got to do what a Jew's got to do. You know, one of my favorite cartoons growing up was Charles Schulz, Peanuts, and Charlie Brown is going out to fly his kite, but there's a storm outside raging, and all his friends, Lucy and others, says, Charlie, you're Meshuggah, you can't, that the wind will destroy your kite in 2 seconds. And the last frame in the cartoon, Charlie Brown is walking out the front door with his kite under his arm, resolutely determined, and he says, a man's got to do what a man's got to do. My friends, a Jew's got to do what a Jew's got to do. I want to share with you a commentary by one of Ben-gurion's Landsleit, another Jew from Poland, from Warsaw. Before the war, Warsaw had a Jewish community second to none. In a city of 1.3 million people, there were 350,000 Jews, 30% of the population. Warsaw was a very Jewish city. My father studied in Warsaw. It was like New York City, it's very Jewish, right? You know, a couple of years ago, I don't know if they still have it, but I saw with my own eyes in Manhattan, I was looking for a parking space, and the official New York City municipal no parking sign did not say no parking. You know what it said? Don't even think of parking here. It's a Jewish city. Warsaw was such a Jewish city. One of the leading rabbis of pre-war Poland was named Rabbi Menachem Zemba. Hashem Yinkom Damo. He was trapped together with all the other Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto. In a dramatic secret offer by the Catholic Church, they offered to help the three most prominent rabbis in the Warsaw Ghetto escape from Poland. Why the Catholic Church made that offer, I'm not sure. Was it altruistic? Was it political? I have no idea. But they had influence. Poland was a very Catholic country. They even produced a pope. And they had the ability to do it. And it was a genuine offer. That the three top rabbis, they would save their lives and get them out of Warsaw. The three rabbis convened a discussion and a debate. On the one hand, what's the debate? Pikuach nefesh, saving a life, overrides everything. If you can get out, save your life, not only may you, you must. It's an obligation. Otherwise, it's like suicide. How could you not accept such a life-saving offer? On the other hand, this was a big shaila, a big question, a moral and ethical halachic question. What about the rest of the poor Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto? What would their reaction, their response, and their feelings be when they hear that the three top rabbis got out? Aha! The holy rabbis saved themselves and left all of us here to fry. Very nice rabbis. It might destroy the morale of the thousands of Jews in the ghetto. It might be a chilul Hashem, a desecration of God's name. It might render the whole Jewish population destroyed and disillusioned, maybe even abandon their faith. So there was a big debate. Halachic, back and forth, moral, ethical. In the end, they simply could not leave their own people behind. And the three rabbis declined the church's offer. And in the end, they died with their people, al Kiddush Hashem. Rabbi Menachem Zemba died, but not all his writings were lost, thankfully. Some survived, were discovered, and are still studied. Today I want to share with you one of those Torah teachings because it goes to the core of anti-Semitism and whether there in fact is any reason for it at all. Menachem Zemba's commentary on Bereshit, Genesis chapter 33, verse 4, it's a meeting, the fateful, dramatic encounter between two long-lost brothers, Yaakov and Esau, Jacob and Esau. After 20 years, they are being reunited. But it's not so simple. Jacob sends messages. They come back with the report that Esau still is gunning for his brother Jacob. He's coming with 400 armed desperados. You know, those guys with the bullets down the chest, you know. He's got 400 of them. So Jacob prepares in three ways. He sends a big gift, a peace offering. He prepares a military strategy, divides his camp into two, and he prays, he davens. Nothing's changed. We still do the same things in our own situations. In the end, Esau sees his brother's gift of the entire herds and herds of livestock. He sees his family, wives, children, and he seems to be mollified and ready to make peace. And instead of killing Jacob, he embraces him. And he vayachabkehu, and he hugs him. Vayishokehu, and he kisses him. And it's on this word vayishokehu that Esau kissed Jacob, that if you look in the actual Torah, not just in the printed Chumash, but in the actual parchment written Torah, there are dots on the words, on the letters over Vayishokehu, and he kissed him. Now, what do these dots mean? It occurs on a couple of words throughout the Torah. It's like an asterisk, you know, a footnote. You see an asterisk, you look at the bottom, and there's sort of a disclaimer or a qualification. You know, it's not exactly what it seems to be. So Rashi, the great commentator, brings two opinions. Why are there these dots? What's the asterisks all about? Number one, he kissed him But there's an asterisk because he didn't really kiss him with all his heart. It wasn't a sincere, genuine kiss or an expression of true love. It was, like the American politicians running for re-election. They kiss babies, It's a photo op, So, but then there's another opinion of none other than Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And he says as follows, halacha hi. It is a halacha. We know that in general, Esau hates Jacob. Halacha hi she Esau soine Yaakov. Esau despises Jacob. But at that moment in time, something exceptional happened. He was moved to mercy, and he actually did, in fact, kiss him with all his heart. And because that is so unusual, that's why there are dots. So the question Rabbi Menachem Zemba asked is the language of Rabbi Shimon. Halachahi. It is a halacha that Esau hates Yaakov. Why use the word halacha? It seems a very strange and inappropriate word here. You could say a klal, it's a principle, a rule. But why the word halacha? Says Rabbi Menachem Zember, a holy martyr of the Warsaw Ghetto, a halacha is a law that is not always necessarily understood by the people. Do you agree with every law and bylaw in your community where you live? The speed limit, for example? I imagine not. And sometimes in court we see people getting off on a technicality, or there are legal loopholes, or the fine print. Do we understand, do we agree with every legal judgment handed down by the court? Definitely not. Many times we do not agree, and we don't understand it. But at the end of the day, the law is the law. It's a fact of life. Nothing we can do about it. In South Africa, the COVID regulations of the government now allows us a maximum of 50 people, 50, in shul. My shul is one of the biggest in the country. We have 1,400 seats. Can you imagine 50 Jews taking up 1,400 seats? It looks what they call umatik, we hope it'll improve and increase, especially for Yontif soon. But that makes no sense. It should be based on the size. You want to make a blanket rule of 50, and a stadium of 90,000 also has 50 people? Is this logical? Is this normal? The law doesn't always make sense. So too, says Reb Menachem Zemba, is the halacha of Esau hating Yaakov. Anti-Semitism is a halacha. It's a fact of life. We don't understand it. It makes no sense. Jews are nice people. We're the best on the planet. We do so much for the whole world, way beyond our numbers. We're constantly saving the world. And the world still doesn't like us. It hurts. But it is what it is. And to show just how anti-Semitism is a halacha, which isn't always understood and it appears illogical, Rabbi Menachem Zember went on to say from personal experience, here in Poland, they hate the Jews. Why? Because we're poor. Scum of the earth, they call us. But in Germany, they hated the Jews too. Why? Because they were rich. They took our money. And in Russia, they hate the Jews. Why? Bourgeoisie, capitalists. In America, they hate the Jews. Why? Communists. Rich, poor, communist, capitalist. You can't win. There's no logic to it. And so in Europe, they said go back to Palestine. In Palestine, they now say go back to Europe. The same anti-Semites who say there was no Holocaust, Holocaust deniers, you know what else they say? The same people? They say Hitler didn't finish the job. Does this make sense? And so there's no logical reason. And therefore there's no logical solution because there's no logical reason. Japan has hardly any Jews. I mean, there is a Chabad house in Tokyo, but does Japan have a Jewish community? You don't look Jewish, right? What's that story? Yeah. But Japan still has anti-Semitism. A guy who never saw a Jew in his life and he hates Jews. Does this make any sense? What's that story about the Jew and the Chinese fellow? They were friends and they were chatting, and one day the Jew suddenly gives a smack to the Chinese friend of his, He says, what was that for? He says, that was for Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor, that was the Japanese, not the Chinese. Japanese, Chinese, all the same to me. 5 minutes later, the Chinese guy gives the Jew a smack across his face. He says, what was that for? He says, that was for the Titanic. The Titanic? Titanic was sunk by an iceberg. Iceberg, Goldberg, it's all the same to me. I saw a video some time ago from Professor Deborah Lipstadt of Atlanta, who wrote a book about anti-Semitism, and here she presented at JLI at the retreat, and she told this joke, and she said this joke proves the absurdity and insanity of anti-Semitism. There's no rhyme or reason. There's lots of shallow excuses, but no rational explanation, or as Rabbi Zemba called it, a halacha. Why the Jews? Why the bicycle riders? Back to my religious hero, Ben-gurion. In Ben-gurion's testimony to the United Nations Commission on the Partition of Palestine back in 1947, before the state, he said some very powerful things. He was arguing for the United Nations to recognize a Jewish state in the Jewish homeland. And as the famous one, he said, when the United Nations representatives and Lord Peel were challenging the Jewish claims, he said as follows: 300 years ago, there came to the New World of America a famous ship from England called the Mayflower. The Mayflower's landing on Plymouth Rock was one of the great historical events in the history of England and America. But I would like to ask any of the Englishmen or Americans sitting here on this commission, do you know what day the Mayflower left port? I'd like to ask the Americans, do they know what date the Mayflower arrived in America? How many people were on the boat? Who were their leaders? What was the menu on the ship? Anybody know that? Well, my friends, said Ben-gurion, more than 3,300 years ago, more than 3,000 years ago, long before the Mayflower, our people left Egypt. And every Jew in the world, wherever he or she is, knows what day they left. It was Pesach. And he knows what food they ate. They had matzah. And he knows the leader was Moses. And we tell this to our children and grandchildren every year. And we say, now we may be enslaved, but next year we will be free, next year in Jerusalem. And we've been saying this for centuries, gentlemen. What was Ben-gurion saying to the United Nations back then? And then all the Arab sheiks came and showed their title deeds to their land, and Lord Peel of the Peel Commission said to Ben-gurion, where's your title deed? And Ben-gurion, who was not the religious one, right, picked up a Tanakh, a Jewish Bible, and said, my Lord, this is our title deed. And that story was confirmed as 100% true by Chief Rabbi Yisrael Meir Lau. This is our title deed. What was Ben-gurion saying? Give us a state because of the Holocaust? No. Give us a state because of anti-Semitism? No. Those are negative and untrue. That's the Palestinian Bobemaisa now. That Europe had Rachmanis on the Jews and gave us their land, and why should they suffer because of Europe's Holocaust? That's a big lie. Ben-gurion said, give us the land because it is our land, and it has been our land for over 3,000 years, long before there was such a thing as a Palestinian, long before there was such a thing as a religion of Islam, which was born only much, much later. Jews have a history, and therefore Jews have a destiny. And part of that very history and destiny is that God made us not chosen for privilege, but for responsibility, to be Mamlechet Kohanim V'Goy Kadosh, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And guess what? It turns out that Hitler had a point. We are the conscience of the world in so many ways. And perhaps that's why the world cannot handle it. And they love to call Israeli soldiers Nazis. And they love to invent this term Israel Apartheid Week on universities not only in South Africa but around the world, to demonize us, to shoot down that golden halo over our heads that they cannot handle. But my friends, we have the last word. My father, of blessed memory, passed away a few years ago, age 91. He was from a town called Shedlitz, 2 train stops from Warsaw. One of my grandsons visited there last week. He was the sole survivor of his entire family. He lost his parents, his brothers, his sisters, the whole family. He ran away as a 14-year-old, went to Vilna, got a Sugihara visa, Moscow, Vladivostok, Kobe, Japan, Shanghai, China, eventually getting to America after the war. When he came to South Africa to our eldest son's bar mitzvah in the Sydenham Shul, at the Kiddush after davening, he asked me, he'd like to say a few words. I had to get this massive crowd quiet. And my father told a short story. He remembers he was 13 or 14. The war started. Germany invaded Poland. He was walking with his father, Hashem Yimkam Domo, down the street in the town of Shedlitz. And suddenly, out of the sky, came the German Nazi Stuka dive bombers, diving low, machine gunning, strafing the city. My father said they were so low you could hear the Nazi pilots laughing while they shot up the town. His father grabbed them and threw him headfirst into a cabbage patch nearby. And they said Shema Yisrael, thinking they're about to breathe their last. And today, said my father, here I am in Johannesburg, South Africa, in a shul, celebrating the bar mitzvah of my eldest grandchild. So who won? And when my father passed away, age 91, he had at that time over 80 great-grandchildren. Today, quite a few more, thank God. And each time a new one was born, he would clutch this little infant to his chest, to his heart, not only because he loved a grandchild, a great-grandchild, but we all knew what he was thinking, thanking God that he was able to rebuild his family that they wiped out, everyone except him. And so that represented his personal victory over Hitler. The Third Reich is no more, but Am Yisrael Chai. So my friends, I'm sorry to tell you that despite the best efforts of the ADL, or the Simon Wiesenthal Center, or President Biden's recent nominee as the State Department's envoy in anti-Semitism, the very same Deborah Lipstadt who I mentioned, who was a Shabbos guest in our shul some years ago as well. Despite all their very best efforts, anti-Semitism is not going away. We need all those organizations to defend us legally, politically, good public relations. And yes, I know our old complaint, Israel needs better hasbara, agreed. But don't become disillusioned when you see anti-Semitism is still here and growing at even an alarming rate around the world. Don't become depressed. Because at the end of the day, what did Ben-gurion say? It's not what the Goyim say, but what the Jews do. And what must we do? We weren't created just to defend ourselves from anti-Semitism, from racists. We are here on a positive mission to change the world for the good, to be proud and practicing Jews who are confident and knowledgeable and live as Jews and raise our children and grandchildren as Jews. And we learn from the people of Israel who live in the worst neighborhood in the world, surrounded by mortal enemies, and they carry on doing what they have to do. And we learn from the late lamented Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, who I spent many occasions with, who kept reminding us that non-Jews respect Jews who respect themselves. And certainly we should learn from the Rebbe. I remember on the 25th yahrzeit of the Rebbe, a journalist in Los Angeles, I forget his name, but I'd love to give credit. I was actually lecturing in Australia at the time, and I came across this in a Jewish newspaper. He coined a phrase which I appreciated. He said, what was the Rebbe's response to anti-Semitism? Pro-Semitism. Not anti, pro-Semitism. What does pro-Semitism mean? It means mitzvah campaigns. It means being positively, proudly Jewish. It means promoting Torah study and kashrut and tefillin and mezuzahs and Shabbos candles and tzedakah and Jewish books and mikveh, etc., etc. We can moan and groan from today until the cows come home about anti-Semitism, but it will achieve very little. The Jewish organizations charged with that responsibility to fight it must do so vigorously, and we support them. But what can you do about it? What can I do about it? We can all do something positive and proudly Jewish. We can live active, committed Jewish lives and ensure, even if we have to pay a lot of money, as someone suggested at a session the other day, to see that our children and grandchildren get Jewish educations, so they will do the same. My friends, there's nothing to run away from. There is everything to embrace and educate the next generation of Jews to understand who we are and where we come from. I derive great nachas seeing the Sinai scholars here. And I said at a session earlier that the Chabad on campus shluchim are on the front lines in the war against assimilation. And we have to make sure that the next generation understands who we are, where we come from, our history, our destiny, to want to be Jewish and to want to be passionate about the Jewish mission. Because it doesn't matter what the anti-Semites say, it matters what the Jews will do. Thank you for listening. His question was, we said before, Rabbi Shimon said, and Rashi quoted it on the verse that Esau kissed Jacob, that it's a halacha that Esau hates Jacob. So, but there are non-Jews who embrace Jews, who like Jews, who support Jews. And that's true. But what Rabbi Shimon was saying is that that's a rule, a general rule. But as we all know, every rule has exceptions. So it doesn't mean there isn't a single non-Jew in the world who's a good friend of the Jews. Thank God we have many. The Gemara says there are chasidei umot ha'olam. There are righteous of the nations of the world who will be meritus of a share in olam haba, in the world to come. We are the only religion, by the way, in the world that will allow other religions into our paradise. Christians say you have to be baptized or you can't get in. You know, if you don't show the cards, no entry. We say if you are righteous, you will get a place in olam haba. So there are clearly righteous people. We don't say every single non-Jew is anti-Semite. God, that would be too much to bear. We have many friends in the world, thank God. But unfortunately, they are sometimes exceptional rather than the rule. Why would anybody be against conscience besides a madman like Hitler?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
I think perhaps it's a brilliant question and a difficult question to answer. And in a way points to the sad state of the world. But perhaps conscience brings with it responsibility. If I don't have it, then I can just live my life the way I like. But if I do have it, then I'm called upon to respond and to do something about the ills of the world. And I can't just sit on my backside and mind my own business. I have to get involved. But it's easier not to get involved, so maybe we turn a blind eye to conscience. Thank you very much.
Click subscribe to see more exclusive content for the most sought-after Jewish speakers, teachers, and thinkers.